Chinle, Arizona, before returning to do a master's degree in biostatistics and an adult cardiology fellowship at the University of Michigan. Upon completion of his fellowship in 2007, Dr. Chan took a position as a cardiologist and researcher at St. Luke's Hospital in UMKC. Dr. Chan is internationally known for his research on cardiac arrest, healthcare disparities, and quality of care, with over $10 million in NIH funding. He has over 300 peer-reviewed publications, with over 40 of these in the New England Journal of Medicine and in JAMA and JAMA subspecialty journals. So if that all didn't amaze you already, get ready to be even more amazed. The stage is all yours, Dr. Chan.
Thank you for the kind introduction, Rishabh. I'm really honored to be here to spend some time with you today. And when Rishabh asked me initially to give the keynote today, I was sort of struggling to figure out what would be of interest to an audience such as yourselves from 3 different medical schools in Kansas City. And I decided that talking about research, even though all of you are presenting research, a number of you, would be of some interest, but what I really wanted to talk about and what I have entitled the talk is keeping the flame alive as to why many of us chose medicine, and in particular, sort of sharing my journey with you all. Many of you are going to be entering residency in the foreseeable future, and it is a difficult challenge that I struggled with in terms of keeping the front and center why I went into medicine to begin with. And it's no different today when medicine is a business. And so hopefully some of the sharing that I will have for you today will just give you some inkling as to perhaps how you can maintain your fire, your authenticity as to why you went into medicine. I think a lot of us here today especially are interested in doing discovery. We want to pave the path forward as to the new dimensions in medicine in the future. Others maybe find that being a physician brings in a steady income. But I think most of us, if not all of us, in some form or shape, choose medicine because we want to have an impact. An impact in terms of doing good, of making the world a better place for our patients, for our families, for ourselves. And so staying true as to why I chose to practice medicine, my journey in medicine was very circuitous, as I will describe. But really, there are 4 mantras that I think will really shape the contours of this talk. A lot of times in medical school, in residency, and post-residency, we feel peer pressure to do what others are doing, to buff up our CVs, to make it look as good as everybody else's. It's not just about your grades in medical school and residency rotations, but it's also about how much research you can put out. And so one of the struggles I had was differentiating how I made decisions. And for me, one of the most defining things of how I chose and made decisions was really thinking with my heart rather than with my head, and going with what felt right with my gut. All of us are involved in making diagnostic decisions and learning how to make those decisions as medical students and soon enough as residents. But really, my challenge to you is to understand the illness experience, both of our patients and the communities in which they live, to better understand why patients struggle to be healthy. When we think about helping others, oftentimes we go through a more paternalistic channel in terms of helping others. We want to give. We want to participate in a medical mission or an overseas mission. And really, I have struggled to understand whether or not that is the best way of helping others, and moving into a paradigm of thinking, how can we empower others to take control of the reins of their own lives so that they can be equipped with the tools to succeed without us? And finally, practicing unbounded generosity throughout all stages of going through this journey. I was an immigrant, and I came to the United States from Hong Kong at the age of 7, and grew up in the tenements in New York City, and attended public schools for all of that time. In public school, I did some basic science bench research, and that was the extent of all my research until I became a fellow in cardiology. I did not do any research in college or in medical school or in residency for that matter. I was lucky enough that I was successful in the research, that I won a number of prizes. And so I wound up going to Harvard University. I thought I was going to be a science major. I started off with biochemistry, but I took a course in the first year of freshman year by a physician named Robert Coles, who was a Pulitzer Prize winner. And the course was called Literature of Christian Reflection. And one of the authors we read was Dorothy Day, who started the Catholic Worker Houses and the Catholic Worker Movement in the United States. A lot of my friends who were pre-med at the time decided they would spend their summers doing research. And I ultimately decided to not do that. I wanted to understand better the movement of the Catholic Worker Houses. And so I wound up spending that first summer after freshman year at Haley House, the Catholic Worker House in Boston. At Haley House, we do two main things. We feed the hungry, and we work for social change. And so all the people who lived in Haley House were the long-term volunteers and homeless people themselves. My roommate was a homeless pimp, and during that summer, I spent the whole time washing dishes, 8 hours a day. We served breakfast and at lunch. And over the course of that summer, I learned so much from the people who lived there, both housed and unhoused, that when you think about the problem of homelessness in Boston at that time, it was not just about the simple equation of whether or not you had an income or a job. And ultimately, there were structural issues that caused and forced people to be homeless in that context. By the time I left Haley House that summer, everybody who was a long-term volunteer was already in jail, demonstrating against the nuclear war armaments that were being prepared by the Trident submarines in New England, and protesting the US involvement in El Salvador and Nicaragua during the 1980s. And that was a real eye-opening experience for me to understand that people were willing to put their lives on the line to work for change. And when I asked Joanne, who lived at the house, who was a Quaker, whether or not she was worried about going to jail, she was sentenced for 6 months, she smiled and said, "This is the perfect opportunity for me to do prison ministry." And it opened up a whole new dimension of thinking that I was not aware of was possible. The following summer, again, I went with my gut and tried to understand more the houseless problem in the New England area. And I lived at Wellspring House, which was a battered women's shelter and their kids. All the women there had faced domestic violence, and I was one of 2 men there. One of the other men was married to the woman who worked there. And my job was to take care of 7 kids when the women were getting life skills. I had never babysat in my life. And there were 5 kids that were 2 and under, a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old. I learned that more than half of the houseless population in Boston were families, not men or women who were single. They're usually invisible, just like they are in Kansas City. More than half the houseless population in Kansas City are homeless families, usually mothers and their children. And of course, the huge challenges of even as simple a thing as getting a job because you don't have childcare, even if you wanted to work. The following summer, I just decided to take the full plunge and take the year off. I was struggling about deciding whether or not I wanted to go into medicine or the priesthood. I grew up Catholic. and I got my degree in chemistry and religious studies, and so I needed some time to think, and so I decided I would spend that whole year with the Christian Appalachian Project in Eastern Kentucky, and I was assigned to teach literacy and GED for people who had dropped out from high school and elementary school. I never taught in my life. My parents were teachers before they immigrated to the United States. And we were in a coal mining area in rural Kentucky, really harsh area with very little employment except coal mining and highway construction. And oftentimes, families had anywhere from 4 to 20 kids. One of my students had 21 kids, and she was 42. All my students, almost all my students, I should say, had dropped out because they got pregnant. 90% of my students were women. I worked in 3 counties. Rockcastle County was 8,000 people when I arrived. The year before I arrived, there were 5 12-year-olds and 33 13-year-olds that had gotten married because they became pregnant and they had to drop out from school. So I would drive from hollow to hollow and visit homes once a week and develop lesson plans. And in that context, I learned about the structural equations that kept people impoverished in that area as to why it is so difficult to come out of poverty when there are, first of all, very few jobs, even if you completed schools, very few role models, and started thinking creatively as to how we can actually mobilize the community to do this on their own. So I started talking with elementary schools in those 3 counties that I was assigned to, and these are all public schools, and I asked teachers, can you help me? You're teaching these students already. What if we actually had, instead of me going to the homes every week, what if we actually had some of these sessions after school, in the evenings at 6 p.m.? Would you be willing to volunteer and help out? And I was shocked that they were, because these are public teachers. They're not getting paid for this. There was no funding. And out of that involvement, we started having people being taught by teachers who were also better understanding the challenges why some of their kids were struggling in school. Part of it was that the parents could not help with their education and until they learned how to read or to do math. But also out of that 2-year experiment was when people started getting their GEDs, when they started learning how to read and write, they started talking about what other things they could do in their community to change the problems that existed in terms of lack of employment, in terms of corruption by their officials. So it became a staging ground for further discussions as to how they could be empowered to make change in their communities. And at the end of the year, when we finished, we probably had 60, 70 individuals that got their GED from this effort. And the collective effort was awarded the Kentucky Colonel Award, which I didn't know anything about, but it's the highest service award, civilian award in the state of Kentucky. And it's a tribute to the teachers and the students, the adult students who took ownership of their own learning and then became even more activistic in the aftermath. In the process of spending time in Eastern Kentucky, I learned a lot about Appalachian culture. This is Tom, who's a fiddler. I learned about tobacco. I learned how to strip tobacco. I've never smoked in my life, but it was an interesting experience to understand the culture of the cycle of jobs that existed there. So really, the experience in Kentucky opened the doors for understanding how, when I wanted to help somebody, perhaps the best thing I could do is figure out ways to empower the communities themselves to stand on their own feet and to speak with their voice. That summer, after the year off, I went to Nicaragua during the conflict with the Contras. With the Sandinistas. The Contras were what the United States had supported at that time. And it was there for the first time I met physicians that modeled what I wanted to do. These were doctors who were also Catholic priests who were making huge changes in their communities, not only treating patients and preaching, but also working for better wages, for land reform, whether they were in the countryside or in the cities. And for the first time, I saw modeled for me people who embodied what it is truly to be a physician and what really was transformative for the communities. I completed my senior year, graduated, and then I still was not sure I wanted to enter medicine, partly because my parents had always told me that I was going to be a doctor when we immigrated, and I was a rebellious teenager. And so I took another year off, and I spent the year in Washington, D.C. As a volunteer with a group called Bread for the World. And looking at a different dimension of how do we affect change for poor folks in the United States and around the world, my job was to do advocacy, to change legislation that makes it more possible for funding to be available at that time for food stamps, which is now SNAP, as well as changing the equation of food aid that we provided during that time in the famine for the Horn of Africa countries of Ethiopia, Somalia, and Sudan, and ensuring that the food aid that we provided as the United States was not tied to political interests, that it would not be only delivered to one party in Ethiopia, but to all folks in Ethiopia and Somalia and Sudan, because hungry people anywhere deserve to be fed. But that summer before medical school, I went to Guatemala, another country in a civil conflict, to better understand a number of things. But I was visiting a friend who was running a homeless shelter in the Lower East Side, and her friend, John Pulley, was a board member of this group called Aldea, advancing local development through empowerment and action. And it was founded by a physician named Carol Berhorst from Tulane in 1962. He was sent by the Lutheran Church, and he went to Chimaltenango, which is an hour outside of Guatemala City, and he sat down in the village square for a whole month. Did nothing but sat and watched. And after a month, he started a clinic and a hospital there. And after about 3 months, he realized he was seeing the same patients come back over and over again for the same infectious diseases or the same chronic illnesses. And he realized that if he continued in this pattern, he would be doing the same patients, the same problems over and over again without any change in the equation as to why people were sick. So he decided, and this is very novel in the 1960s and early 70s, to start training healthcare promoters. He asked villages from where the patients came from, and there was no other hospital in Chimaltenango at that time. Find somebody that you trust, and they will be your village health promoter. They will come down to the hospital every Friday, and they will round with me and learn how to treat patients in your village. And they, as a result, did a lot of the primary care in terms of prevention and in terms of treating respiratory and diarrheal illnesses in their community, dispensing antibiotics, and then referred when patients were outside their bound of training or if they were not getting better. And that model became one of the 10 healthcare models upheld by the World Health Organization in 1976 as one to emulate in terms of primary care in resource-poor countries. And the healthcare promoters were both men and women, and none of them had more than a sixth grade education. However, 2 years into that experiment, Berhorst realized you're still seeing a lot of the same problems. You're still seeing diarrheal illness. It turns out you're not going to eradicate diarrheal illness until you change the lack of access to potable and drinking water in the community. Many of the Mayan who live in the highlands in Guatemala walk 2 to 4 hours each day just to fetch water. Imagine that. And it was all done by women and girls. So girls were not going to school. We know now that when girls get education, even through the 4th to 6th grade in resource-poor countries, they make better decisions as adults. They have smaller families as a consequence, and it changes the dynamic of poverty and malnutrition in the community. Even if you can do one thing such as bringing water into a community. And clean water, I can't read what I don't have to pull up my phone to read, but you can read the so basically, clean water frees young girls from having to carry water 2 to 4 hours a day, so that they can go to schools for the very first time often. It turns out that even if the water is not boiled and not potable, just having running water reduces dysentery by 90% in a community. So clean water means less diarrhea, fewer deaths, less chronic malnutrition. And then Bearhurst moved on to the other issue in terms of diarrheal disease. You can have clean water, but you need a place for waste. So latrines and sanitation became a centerpiece of their work. They started then moving on to teaching families to have diversified gardens. Everybody was doing corn and maize and beans, but what if you supplemented that with more micronutrients to also improve nutrition? They then started doing, this was at the time the Grameen Bank was doing in Bangladesh, microcredit loans, so that families can then, so poor people are not considered good credit in third world countries and cannot get loans like we can. Loans of $40 to $60 are transformative to buy some initial chickens and then therefore to bring protein into the diet of families and also income subsequently. And they found that by doing so, the families were raising pigs and chickens and other types of vegetables with repayment rates of 98% or higher. So this was the context of me going into medical school, and I was really still struggling as to whether or not I wanted to do medicine. When I had my interview at Hopkins, the dean of students was my interviewer. He was pacing in the room. He didn't even look at me when he asked the question, so why do you want to be a doctor? And the interview was 15 minutes. And I did not prepare. And I just said, I'm not sure I do. And he stopped. And we talked for 15 minutes about what I had just spent the last year doing in Guatemala and with Bread for the World. And that was my interview. And I left thinking, my gosh, I totally botched my interview. Had nothing to do with why I wanted to go to medical school. But apparently that was probably the most interesting interview that he had in that year. And I was called about 2 weeks later with a slot to go to medical school. In medical school, I felt the need at Hopkins. Hopkins is a very weird place back then, it may still be. They posted all the grades on the outside of the door to the lecture hall after every test. They posted it with means and medians, standard deviations, and interquartile range. They posted not the letter grade, they posted the numerical grade. They didn't post your name, but it was by social security number or by alphabetical order. I forget, but you could figure out who was who. It was probably alphabetical order. So it's very competitive. And so I found the need to find a different identity. And so started getting other folks involved. And we started an organization, an umbrella organization called Community Impact, which was an umbrella of different community service organizations to really, again, incentivize students to continue the foundation as to why they went into medicine. Keep that authenticity alive as to why we wanted to be doctors to begin with. And during that time, since I had spent 20 months in Appalachia, 4 summers and the whole year in between, started leading some service trips during spring break to introduce other students to Eastern Kentucky and some of the things that I'm talking about today. We also did in the summertime 3 health and human rights trips to Guatemala and El Salvador to, again, introduce the intersection of public health and conflict and how that impacts individual health for individuals. And when I had been in Guatemala and when I was in Nicaragua, I was also spending time with kids and working with them with art therapy, collecting some of the drawings of what violence they had seen within their own country. I had spent some time in the West Bank during my senior year in college, and again, worked with a number of kids with art therapy. And so these drawings were submitted to UNICEF, where they had a worldwide tour of images from children from around the world. Again, trying to really keep my sense of grounding alive as to what is important to me in medicine. I had an interest in doing med-peds, and that's what I wound up doing. My first interview was at the Brigham, and it was the weirdest, another weird interview. Marshall Wolf was the director of the residency, and he sat down. He said, "You're Paul, right?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Give me a moment." He walks over to his landline because there was no cell phones at that time, and he calls somebody and says, "Here, talk to him. This is Paul Farmer." End of interview. That was my interview. And so I had a chat with Paul Farmer, and then we arranged for dinner that night. Any of you know Paul Farmer? Okay. Since most of you don't, I really encourage you to do one of two things or both. His biography by Tracy Kidder is called Mountains Beyond Mountains. He is known as the person who brought social justice into international health. And if there's one person you need to know, if you're interested in working beyond the boundaries of the hospital, it's Paul Farmer and his organization, Partners in Health. There's also on the PIH website a film documentary where you actually see footage of Paul and his words, and it's called Bending the Arc. So Paul, and I was a college student at Duke, and he said, "I'm not really getting this education stuff." He wanted to be a doctor. He just basically spent time, he went to Haiti and volunteered and decided that he was not going to leave Haiti ever again. He left Haiti, but that it became so embedded into his persona. He started this organization while he was at Duke called Partners in Health in a very bleak part of Haiti in the Kanj region. Okay, there was no hospital, there was no clinic for hundreds of miles. And he basically enlisted both Haitians and non-Haitians to join him in this endeavor. And Paul is famous for known for a lot of things, but sorry, whoops. One of his famous quotes is, "If I'm hungry, that is a physical problem, a material problem. If someone else is hungry, that is a spiritual problem." And he took it seriously. It was during the time of the AIDS crisis. He started Partners in Health in the late 1980s. As you can imagine, the AIDS epidemic was raging in the United States. It was raging even more in Haiti. So Paul believed that you have to do everything that's necessary to get people care. Sorry. And he had a tenacious belief that third world patients deserved first world care. So what did he do? He built a hospital with first world Brigham and Women's, he was at the Brigham, care. All the technology, all the drugs, especially for HIV, when AZT was unaffordable, even in the United States, to so many. He was pilfering the Brigham pharmacy to get drugs down there. And he basically shamed and lobbied pharmaceutical companies to lower the prices of AZT and subsequently, the other subsequent lineages of drugs, the protease inhibitors, so that it became more affordable to resource-poor countries. The World Health Organization said that this is not cost-effective. He made it cost-effective. He enlisted healthcare promoters to visit families. He embedded in the care food, because you cannot get better from HIV if you're wasting from AIDS. You cannot get better from tuberculosis if you are emaciated, even with the best of drugs. He understood that you have to walk with people along their journey of illness and ensure that all obstacles are broken. When he started treating multi-drug resistant tuberculosis, and I worked with Paul, this is Paul in Haiti. I worked with Paul when I was in residency there. This is the town, this is outside Lima. It's Caraballo, it's a shanty town essentially, where there was an MDR-TB outbreak. And we were in the beginnings of starting up the MDR-TB program. And again, the World Health Organization said you can't spend $10,000 per patient in Peru because it's not cost effective. And then within a year, because of Paul and his co-founder Jim Kim's efforts, the prices of these drugs dropped below $1,000. It's still expensive, but it became less expensive. They were able to show that you can treat third world patients when you walk alongside them, when you provide nutritional supplements at rates that were higher than the United States. This was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, and they had rates of cure in excess of 70%. These were drugs, these were strains of TB that were so resistant. We had, when I arrived, one of the healthcare promoters who got MDR-TB had 8 drug-resistant TB. And so we were talking about, on average, 4 drug-resistant TB that they were treating at efficacy rates higher than the United States. And Paul is known to have the incredible sense of putting you at the center of his universe. He knew every Haitian janitor at the Brigham. That's why when he rounded, he would never finish rounding till 11 p.m. because he would talk to every janitor, and he would want to not finish until after 7 p.m. because the janitors wouldn't come on until perhaps later on. And for Paul, it was a way for him not only to engage with all levels of staff at the Brigham, but also to know what's really happening on the ground in Haiti for the folks who were there and their families in Haiti. This is him at the United Nations, really, again, paving the way. And now today, treating HIV with at least 3, if not more drugs, treating MDR-TB is the standard of care. It is not, it's not, what am I trying to say? It would not have been possible without people like Paul Farmer, who basically could reimagine what is possible just because others told you that it was not. He empowered communities both in Haiti and in Peru and elsewhere, again, with the tools to get better. And Paul passed away a few years ago. He had started a medical school in Rwanda. He had done rounds, or teaching, I should say, until 10 p.m. And then he started rounds at 10 p.m., as he usually does. And he never woke up. It's believed that he had a massive heart attack. And it's been a great loss, but his legacy continues. So, again, mountains beyond mountains. One book you could easily get. After the journey of residency, my wife and I, Katie, we decided we weren't going to go overseas. Katie did not want to work overseas, so we compromised and went and spent 4 years working among the Navajo in Chinle, Arizona. And Katie, my wife, just returned this February back to Chinle to work there, so I'm doing the dance of commuting back and forth. Chinle is in the middle of nowhere. I mean, nowhere. I was telling Rishab's dad, Dr. Gower, before I came up here, that the closest airport is Albuquerque, and then once I land, it's a 240-mile drive. And so it's a full day just to get out there. When we were there, 50% of the people did not have running water. And today, 50% of the people still don't have running water. When I was there 20 years ago, 25 years ago, 50% of the people don't have electricity. Today, 30% don't have electricity. There are almost no jobs. There's mining, construction, the hospital, and the schools. It is one of the poorest places in the United States, and there are very few people who know the difficulties that native tribes struggle against. Chinle actually was the epicenter of the COVID-19 pandemic on the reservation. And the Navajo Nation, I don't know if you know this, had the highest per capita mortality of COVID-19 in the United States in 2020 and 2021. It is a spectacular place. The second largest canyon in the United States is located 4 miles from Chinle, Canyon de Chelly. It's 35 miles long and about 800 feet deep. This is Spider Rock. In Navajo culture, it's where the universe began. A lot of traditional folks live in one-room circular hogans, and oftentimes with dirt floors. And the reason why it's so hard to get water there is you have to dig more than, or drill more than 2,000 feet to get water. And because folks do not live in clusters like the Hopi do, or the Apache do. I spent some time in the Apache reservation. They live in ranch style. You have to drill 2,000 feet at each home, which is impractical or very difficult to do. Most of the women are weavers. They weave a wool. These rugs take about 2 months to make, and they're spectacular. Oftentimes, depending upon which community on the Navajo reservation you are on, the patterns reflect that, just like they do in Guatemala. And so you can tell where somebody comes from based on the patterns that they weave. And this is the hospital, Chinle Hospital. If any of you are ever thinking about doing Indian Health Service, it is an incredible experience. When we went there were 40 medical staff. There were also nurses, respiratory therapists, lab techs. You cannot rent or own on the Navajo reservation, so all the housing is behind the hospital. And as a result, you have an instant ashram of like-minded people, oftentimes beginning their journey of starting a family of similar age. I just talked with my wife, Katie, last night. She has a potluck tonight, a potluck Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday this week. And that was our lives in Chinle. It was potluck galore. There was nary a week where we did not have a potluck. And so it was a journey into a sense of communal living that we had not had previously. And it's 3 to 4 hours from the most crazy places in the world, the Grand Canyon, Sedona, Moab, Telluride. So we would oftentimes go together on the weekends to play, to bike, to hike, to ski. So if any of you have any interest in the future, contact me because I can forward you more information or connect you with the people in these respective places. This was actually just taken from October, a couple of months ago when I was out there. This is Antelope ruins. There's a lot of ruins there. Some of the trails are funky. You just can't fall. This is us going down Baby Trail. This is the trail that women used to carry their babies up, and we're like on hands and feet just to get up this. But the views are spectacular as long as you're not too afraid of heights. So after 4 years there, oh, I forgot to mention, when we were there in Chinle, it was really a cowboy medicine, if you will. We had no CT scanner the whole time I was there. If you needed a CAT scan, you would have to fly somebody to Flagstaff. We only had one plane. That meant for the next 4 to 6 hours, nobody else could get a CAT scan. We had no specialists, no subspecialists. So I did all the cardiology because there was a lot of cardiology at the Brigham at the time because they were running the TIMI trials. And I remember the first time I put a temporary wire in a comatose patient with complete heart block in the ICU. I was reading the packaging. The nurse had the phone to my ear with the cardiologist at Tucson as I was advancing the wire into the patient's heart. I was doing orthopedics, I was delivering, I was doing a little bit of everything that I wasn't trained to do, but we learned a lot in the process. But after Chinle, I decided I would actually consolidate my cardiology training, and I Katie's parents were in Michigan, so the only place she would want me to go was Michigan, because we had our first child in Chinle. And so I went to the University of Michigan, and I interviewed there. Didn't know what to expect. And then the residency director said, fellowship director called me and said, hey, we have this research fellowship called the T32 Fellowship. And keep in mind, I had not done any research since high school. He said, I think you'd be perfect for it. And I'm scratching my head and I'm like, why? But it was the best call that could have ever happened. I went there and learned how to do research, did a master's in biostatistics, and started doing research for the first time since high school. And completed my cardiology fellowship subsequently. And then I came here in 2007 and started a combined job, half research, half cardiology. One of the things that I really wanted to do was really look at and publish on disparities in care, because I feel like it was a intersection between the work that I was interested in doing outside of medicine, so to speak, and also in research. Angel Garcia was a cardiology fellow, Black and Hispanic. And this was during COVID-19. We ran into each other in the bathroom. Some of the best conversations, by the way, for figuring out research projects are in the bathroom or on the way to the bathroom. And so I said to Angel, I have this data set. What if we look at whether, if you're Black or Hispanic, you're less likely to get bystander CPR when you have a cardiac arrest outside the hospital? We already knew the answer. The answer is yeah, you're less likely. But the reason why this wound up in the New England Journal was because we found that you're even less likely to get bystander CPR when you have a cardiac arrest as a Black or Hispanic person in public. That difference was wider than at home. And so that was the reason why this became an important paper at the end of the day. But along the journey of doing research and coming here and practicing clinical medicine, I realized that I was getting too swept up again in my work and not really remembering why I went into medicine in the first place. I can't advance, however. Now, I mentioned that the Grand Canyon was 3.5 hours from Chinle. And in 2010, 3 years after I started at St. Luke's, on a Sunday morning, my youngest child, Jesse, who was 6 at that time, and I came across a man who was sleeping on the sidewalk out near our house. I didn't think about it at the time, but throughout the rest of the day, Jesse asked me how that man was doing multiple times. And it struck me at that time that I had really not equipped my family, my kids, with understanding some of the social and economic issues in our community in Kansas City. And on a whim, I thought, well, I'm going to do a hike. I'm going to do a hike in the Grand Canyon. I've hiked there many times before. I've gone rim to rim in the Grand Canyon. You guys been to the Grand Canyon before? But I've always wanted to go rim to rim to rim, go from the south rim down to the bottom, 10 miles down, 15 miles up to the north rim, that's 25 miles, and back in a 24-hour period. That was the goal. We had set a plan, and I had talked to a Peace Corps volunteer who was a water engineer in Chinle to do that, but plans fell through. So I said, well, because of Jesse's questions, let's do this. I'm going to try to fulfill that dream of doing a rim to rim to rim hike, and I'm going to raise money to support programs that bring water into a community, that bring latrines into a community overseas, that bring money back into the Kansas City area for programs that have novel solutions to hunger. And so in 2010, we did that hike. I did that hike. It was just me. We raised like $34,000, and I thought I was done. 6 months later, people asked me, when are you doing the hike again? And I'm like, what do you mean? And I shouldn't liken it to pregnancy, because I'm a man. But I limped around for about a week, and I was really stupid in that first hike. I brought no carbs. I thought, I'm gonna bring the most dense food, so I'm gonna just bring nuts. So I was actually ketotic the last 3 miles and hallucinating and dizzy and doing all sorts of weird things during the 23rd hour of the hike. And I could have stumbled off the switchback very easily. I stumbled a number of times. So never occurred to me that this was something that people thought it was doable again. I did it again and again. And this past October was our 16th consecutive year of doing it. If you've never been to the Grand Canyon at some point in your life, I encourage you to not only go there, but go inside the canyon in some form or shape. It is a different experience at night. The silence is immaculate. And because the rim to rim to rim hike takes 20 to 24 hours, we start in the dark at 3 a.m. and we finish in the dark, usually at midnight or 1 a.m. And so we spend a lot of our time, half the time, hiking in the dark. And this is the first year. We started having people join me in 2012, and this year, the fourth year, 2013, you can see my wife Katie and I, and my neighbor John and his daughter. It was just the four of us. And then it expanded. And it expanded to food industry people. We had CEOs of food industry, gluten making company join us, as well as two other people who do lobbying for food. My kids are also joining us, Jesse and Dylan, in this picture, as well as a bighorn sheep that photobombed us in the background. We've had some interesting people join us. This is Nate Miller in 2019, our 10th year. Nate is special because he is a heart transplant recipient, 18 months out, and he hiked all 50 miles. He was actually probably the best hiker that year. This is just 2 years ago, 2023. The woman in the center is Grace Firestone. She had a cardiac arrest when she was 18, and she was defibrillated 6 times in the field. She now is she had just graduated from Stanford Family Medicine, and she joined us for the hike. Her goal is to show other cardiac arrest survivors that anything is possible. And she continues to do amazing feats since then. This is from this year. We raised $165,000. 3/4 of the money goes overseas, 1/4 stays in Kansas City. And over the last 16 years, we've raised almost $2 million, with about $500,000 of it to innovative programs in the Kansas City area. They include Reconciliation Services, Cultivate KC, which works with refugees, Sheffield Place with homeless families, as well as Cherith Brook House, the Catholic Worker House in Kansas City. And I mentioned Church World Service because they're the organization that gets 75% of the funding overseas. And they do a lot of what Aldea does. They do a comprehensive approach to addressing hunger in the community, but involving the community and asking them first, what do you need, when they first partner with the community, because the community always knows what their needs are best. This visit was just in September. I was in Kenya visiting some of the programs, and the women there were walking 3 hours each way every day to get water, 6 months out of the year when there were no rains. And so Church World Service decided that they would build something called a sand dam to trap water so that it would be available throughout the entire year. And it was at a cost of about $5 per person. And it's transformed the community, literally. They do the same types of projects for generating income as Aldea does. Families were provided 3 chickens, in this case, and then they were supposed to give at least 1, if not more, chickens to another person in the community over time so that it populates the whole community. They were working in refugee camps as well as outside refugee camps in Kenya and Tanzania. And it turns out honey is a big business in Kenya. I didn't know that. And they can make even more money from honey and doing beehives. And so they were training community members how to raise bees and harvest honey. And it became so successful that they were also able to purify their own honey and sell it at a higher price. I know Mr. Gower, Dr. Gower, I should say, knows this, and AJ and Adita, who donates to a hike every year, knows this as well. But I send an email. I'm finishing up with this. to our supporters for the Grand Canyon hike before and after every year. And so this came from last year's writing. My wife thinks or says that I preach twice a year, and those are the 2 times. This is an excerpt from it, and I think it envelops of how strongly I feel about how we approach medicine and how we approach human beings in life. And this was written like at 3 a.m. Tonight, with the sky lit up by a full moon, as we ascended the last 10 miles from the canyon bottom, up 4,400 feet in elevation, back to the south rim, I reflected on what Simone Weil, the French philosopher and mystic, once said. Attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. It is easy to do the busy work of serving the meal and washing dishes or mopping the floor, but many of the most vulnerable have been stripped of their dignity and are often invisible in our society. Taking the time to focus attention on the person in front of you, to greet them with attention and intention, to sit with them and share a meal, to listen to them, to learn from them. This is the generosity of accompaniment, of building community, of affirmation of the human soul in front of us, of providing a space where one can finally be heard. This is what we hope to fund in our Grand Canyon Walk programs like Church World Service or the local programs which our hike supports, such as Cherith Brook, Sheffield Place, Reconciliation Services, and Cultivate KC. We intentionally choose these programs because they not only respond to people who are hungry, but also provide innovative solutions to hunger in a way that empowers people, accompanies them on their journey. It is the work of love, rooted in a humble recognition that all persons are valuable and deserve to be visible. I've been fortunate to have mentors, and great mentors, but none of them in actual practice of clinical medicine or research. I don't think my life would be the same without individuals like Paul Farmer, who are able to ask the hard questions, that if you're hungry, that is a physical or a material problem, but if someone else is hungry, that is a spiritual problem. Paul was fond of also saying, you can never work overtime for the poor. And so as I finish, just reminding ourselves, or me, why I have been able to try to keep my foundation as sturdy as possible through these years as to why I chose medicine. Thinking with my heart rather than my head has served me, I think, well, in acting with my gut. Understanding the illness experience of patients and communities. Paul was he commonly mocked the fact that people would say that patients are non-compliant. He showed that when provided the supports in the poorest places of the earth, patients were not only compliant, but they were cured. It is really physicians and healthcare workers that don't understand or that don't work to make possible the compliance for patients, that patients don't always take their medications. When I send a patient home from heart failure, hospitalized for heart failure, if I do not realize that they have to pay the utility bills, they have to pay the rent, it doesn't help me to understand why they didn't take the medications. Even if the copay at Walmart was $4, but I've given them 6 new medicines and they don't have the $24 or the transportation to get them to Walmart. We need to think critically of how we can be involved in others' lives in a way that ultimately makes it easier for them to stay on their own feet. It's very easy to do a paternalistic model where we go overseas, where we hand out Tylenol or Motrin, but it's much harder, but oftentimes more durable and more humane to find ways to engage to make it possible for communities to subsist on their own feet. and ultimately finding ways to practice in all phases of our professional and personal lives unbounded generosity. I've never found an instance where I've received more than I've given. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Chan. We have some time for questions. We have a microphone, we'll pass it around.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chan. I really enjoyed your learning about your journey and what you had done, and you've been through a very circuitous journey, as you mentioned. One question I had for you was, you were really guided by your faith initially, and you talked a lot about the intersection of faith and medicine and how it helped you get where you are. The young people these days are quite different. You know, many of us are not religious. We don't raise our kids to be religious. So, do you think faith is critical for this kind of work, or how do our young people today, in this world of materialism and changing, and chasing money, how do they figure out that balance between taking care of themselves and their communities?
Thanks for the question, Dr. Mansell. I don't think faith is essential. I haven't talked about my journey in faith, but I don't go to regular services anymore. I found the Catholic Church to be challenging in a different way, but I find that either if it's faith or if you practice humanism, some center of gravity that is the core principles of who you are, that drive you, that motivate you in pursuing medicine, in your family. That is the thing that really should be the driving force. And for many people, it can be faith, but it does not have to be faith itself. Faith can sometimes provide people a community to support them. At the same time, there are other avenues to do that. Like I said, it's been about 15 years since I've attended regular services. Church World Service is a conglomeration of 37 Protestant denominations. I'm not even Protestant. They range from the very conservative, like Baptists, to the very liberal Unitarian. So they do no mission work because they couldn't agree even if they tried. They really focus on the actual works of mercy, if you will, of really changing conditions on the ground for people. So I think that finding core friends and mentors is critical. I tell my mentees, you need more than one mentor. You may want, a research mentor, but you need a life mentor as well. And that person doesn't have to be a physician. Paul Farmer was not religious in any form or shape. He respected the role of religion in society, but he felt that religion can sometimes also be a hindrance for communities. So it depends on what context faith is being wielded, so to speak. So as you pursue your journey, just try to stay steadfast to what makes you tick, what makes you motivated for medicine. And sometimes it's helpful to write them down, to journal that, because you can look back on it and remind yourself as to what's important and most important to you.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Chan, for an amazing keynote address. Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Chan, for that speech. Truly inspiring. I think we can all take away a lot from that. The humility it takes for someone to accomplish this much, all from his small flame. That is what kept his journey alive. From one Grand Canyon hike into an annual famous Kansas City Grand Canyon fundraiser, getting quantifiable results in his work in Native American reservations, to even something he didn't mention, teaching middle school science Olympiad. Even still, even after he used to teach me and his children, and after we've long since graduated, he has continued that up. We can really learn so much from his experiences, and his one flame that he had that he started and he didn't let die. So thank you so much, Dr. Chan, for taking the time to come talk to us today. And I really encourage you all to please talk to him, ask any questions after this. And for the next steps, oh yeah, give him another round of applause. All right, and then we'll have Nivadita come up and talk about the next poster session.
Hey guys, my name is Nivedita. I'm the logistics director for the conference today. Thank you guys so much for being here, and we really appreciate all of your attendance and participation. So thank you so much, Dr. Chen, for your time today and sharing. So we're going to start the second poster session now. So whoever's presenting, you guys are going to be judged 2 times. You have 8 to 10 minutes for the presentation, and then there'll be 2 to 3 questions after for Q&A. So just make sure you're standing by your posters at all times, just in case a judge comes by. But yeah, thank you guys.